Why the avoidance cycle always ends with the one they tried to control? Have you ever noticed how the person who pulls away the most is usually the one who ends up wanting control the most? And somehow, no matter how hard they try to stay distant, they always end up circling back to the one they once pushed away. You see, the avoidant doesn't really fear love. They fear loss of control. At first, they seem confident, independent, untouchable. They create distance, they withdraw, they convince themselves they don't need anyone. But here's the twist: that same control they fight to keep becomes the very thing that destroys their peace. They push love away to protect themselves, but in doing so, they create the exact emptiness they were trying to avoid. And when the person they pushed away finally lets go, the avoidance illusion of power collapses, because now they're no longer the one choosing the distance. They realize the roles have reversed. The person they once tried to control is now the one in control. And that's when the cycle hits hardest: the regret, the curiosity, the sudden "I miss you" messages. It's not that the avoidant suddenly discovers new love. It's that they're suddenly without control. And that's the deepest irony. Avoidants spend so long trying not to be vulnerable that they end up at the mercy of the very emotions they tried to suppress. Real love doesn't require control. It requires safety. Safety to stay, to speak, to be seen. And until the avoidant learns that control is not protection, they'll keep losing the ones who were willing to love them, all because they were too afraid to be loved back. Avoidance often disguises itself as independence, but in truth, it's about control. When someone identifies as avoidant, what they're really saying, often without realizing it, is, "I feel safer when I'm the one deciding how close someone can get to me." It's not that they don't want love or connection. It's that love represents unpredictability, and unpredictability threatens their sense of safety. By controlling the distance between themselves and others, they believe they're maintaining power over potential pain. It's a survival instinct, not a lack of emotion. In many cases, this pattern starts long before any romantic relationship. It's learned. Maybe as a child, they experienced love that was inconsistent, affection one day, rejection the next. Or perhaps they were taught, directly or indirectly, that needing someone made them weak. Over time, they built a kind of emotional armor. That armor became their control mechanism. If they don't depend on anyone, they can't be disappointed. If they never show need, they can't be rejected. The irony, of course, is that the armor meant to keep them safe ends up being the very thing that isolates them. When an avoidant person enters a relationship, control becomes their hidden currency. They measure intimacy not by how connected they feel, but by how much space they can maintain without losing the other person. This might look like pulling away after a deep conversation, avoiding serious labels, or creating arguments that push their partner to retreat. Each act of withdrawal reinforces their sense of control. They're steering the emotional ship, deciding when to come close and when to drift. But it's not real control, it's emotional management rooted in fear. The partner of an avoidant often feels confused. One moment, they're being pulled close, the next, they're being shut out. The avoidance hot and cold behavior isn't meant to manipulate, it's meant to regulate. The closeness triggers fear, so they retreat. The distance triggers loneliness, so they return. It's an exhausting cycle, one that can make even the most patient partner feel uncertain or unseen. To the avoidant, though, this dance feels familiar, predictable, safe. It's how they keep the illusion that they're in charge of their emotional world. True independence, however, is different. Independence means having the confidence to be alone without fear, but also the courage to be close without losing yourself. Avoidance masquerades as independence because it celebrates the idea of needing no one, but it's actually rooted in deep emotional dependence, dependence on control. They need to control the pace, the vulnerability, the narrative, because if they let go, they risk being hurt. Control becomes the only way they know how to feel secure, even if it costs them connection. The tragedy of this pattern is that while the avoidant believes they're protecting themselves from pain, they're really preserving it. Every wall they build to prevent rejection becomes a wall that guarantees loneliness. They don't realize that safety in love isn't created through distance, it's created through trust. But as long as they equate closeness with danger, they'll keep using control as their shield and mistaking fear for freedom. Control feels safe, But it's a trap. When someone operates from an avoidant attachment style, control becomes their anchor in a sea of uncertainty. It gives them a sense of stability in relationships that often feel unpredictable. They convince themselves that as long as they can dictate the pace, the depth, or the timing of connection, they'll never be caught off guard by disappointment or heartbreak. Control becomes their way of managing fear of rejection, fear of loss, and most importantly, fear of being truly seen. But what begins as a strategy for safety quickly transforms into a cage that keeps them isolated from the very intimacy they crave. At first, control feels empowering. They set emotional boundaries that seem healthy, they keep their independence, and they avoid situations that might make them vulnerable. It feels like they're doing relationships the smart way, guarded, careful, measured. But this sense of safety is fragile because it's not based on trust or emotional openness. It's based on avoidance. They're not actually safe. They're just alone inside walls they've built so high that no one can reach them. What they call peace is often just the absence of emotional risk. It's quiet, predictable, and comfortable, but deeply empty. When they try to control connection, what they're really doing is controlling unpredictability. Love, by nature, is unpredictable. It requires surrender. You can't script how someone will respond when they'll need you or how they'll love you back. For an avoidant person, this lack of control can feel like standing at the edge of a cliff. So they pull back. They manage their emotions by rationing affection, by intellectualizing their feelings, by keeping things casual. But all these tactics only create distance. They think they're protecting their heart, but in truth, they're starving it. The longer they maintain control, the less connected they become, not just to others, but to themselves. Because real intimacy forces us to face parts of ourselves we'd rather avoid: our insecurities, our fears, our longing to be loved. Control silences those voices. It numbs the discomfort, but it also numbs the joy. Over time, the relationship starts to feel mechanical. The other person senses the emotional ceiling, that invisible line they can never cross. They stop trying, they pull away, and the avoidant feels validated. See, they tell themselves, people always leave. But they don't see that it wasn't love that failed. It was control that suffocated it. Eventually, what once felt like power begins to feel like punishment. They may have avoided heartbreak, but they've also avoided closeness. The loneliness creeps in slowly, an ache that control can't soothe. The calls they don't return, the affection they deflect, the vulnerability they suppress. All of it adds up to a life that feels safe on the surface, but hollow underneath. Control was supposed to protect them from pain, but instead, it became the reason they never truly heal. What they thought would keep them from being hurt ends up being the very thing that keeps them from being loved. The moment the person and avoidant, once pushed away, finally detaches is the moment everything begins to unravel for them. Up until that point, they believed they had control. They believed they were choosing distance, managing the emotional temperature of the relationship, deciding when to engage and when to disappear. It gave them a sense of power, a reassurance that they were safe from rejection because they were the ones controlling the rhythm of connection. But when the other person finally stops chasing, when they no longer reach out, explain, or try to fix things, the avoidance carefully built illusion collapses. What they thought was control is suddenly exposed as fear, and the silence they once craved starts to feel unbearable. For so long, the avoidance dynamic has depended on the other person's persistence. Every time the partner reaches out, forgives, or waits patiently, it reinforces the avoidant's sense of security. They believe they can always return when they're ready, that love will always be waiting in the same place. The moment that changes, when the partner chooses self-respect over pursuit, the avoidant feels a shift they didn't expect. They thought they were protecting themselves from vulnerability, but now they find themselves confronting it head on. The control they used as a shield becomes useless when the other person's attention and affection are no longer guaranteed. It's not uncommon for the avoidant to misinterpret this new distance as rejection, but it's not rejection, it's consequence. The partner has simply stopped participating in the emotional tug of war. And when that happens, the avoidant begins to experience the very thing they've spent so much energy avoiding, the feeling of being powerless. They realize that control was never mutual. It was a one-sided illusion. As the partner emotionally detaches, the avoidant is forced to face the truth they've denied. The relationship's balance was sustained only by the other person's effort. Without it, everything falls apart. The silence that follows becomes deafening. The avoidant starts to think about the conversations they avoided, the affection they withheld, the moments they pulled away instead of leaning in. They may tell themselves they're fine, that they prefer solitude, but deep down, something feels off. It's not peace anymore. It's emptiness. They start to wonder if maybe they pushed too far, if maybe they mistook love for control and distance for safety. The irony is painful. They wanted to avoid being hurt, yet now they're feeling the ache of loss more intensely than they ever imagined. When the partner detaches, the avoidant can no longer hide behind emotional management. The game ends and reality sets in. It's not that they suddenly crave love out of nowhere, it's that they miss the sense of control that love once gave them. The moment they're no longer the one choosing distance, they realize how fragile their sense of security truly was. And that realization, more than anything, exposes the cost of their avoidance. The loss of someone who once tried to love them despite their walls. When the avoidant reaches out after pulling away, their "I miss you" often carries a different meaning than what it appears to say. To the person on the receiving end, those words may sound like a change of heart, a realization of love, or a moment of emotional clarity. But for the avoidant, it's rarely about a sudden surge of affection. It's about a shift in control. For so long, they've been the one determining when to connect and when to withdraw. They've managed the emotional distance, feeling safe as long as they were the one deciding the terms. Yet, when the other person stops waiting, when they detach, move on, or set boundaries, the avoidant's sense of control starts to crumble. The "I miss you" that follows isn't always born from genuine longing. It's born from the discomfort of losing that control. This kind of message or reach out is often triggered not by love itself, but by absence. The avoidant becomes aware of the silence. They notice that their messages aren't being answered right away, that the energy they once took for granted is gone. The other person is no longer orbiting their world, and that realization unsettles them deeply. It's not that they suddenly see the other person differently. It's that they see their own role in a different light. When the partner detaches, the avoidant no longer has the security of being wanted without effort. They feel the loss of power more than the loss of connection. The balance has shifted, and that's something the avoidant's ego struggles to accept. Their "I miss you" often comes wrapped in nostalgia. They might recall moments of warmth, laughter, or physical closeness, but it's filtered through the lens of longing for what once made them feel safe, not necessarily for the person themselves. It's a bid for reassurance, a way to check if the emotional door is still open. If the partner responds warmly, the avoidant regains that comforting sense of influence. They still matter, they still have access, they're still desired. That validation soothes the discomfort that comes when they no longer feel in control. But once that comfort is restored, many avoidants retreat again because the original fear of intimacy hasn't been resolved, it's just been temporarily silenced. To the partner, this can feel confusing or even cruel. They interpret the "I miss you" as an emotional breakthrough, hoping it signals change. But for the avoidant, it's more often a reflex than a revelation. It's not about love lost or found. It's about balance restored. They want to feel close enough to ease their anxiety, but not so close that they feel exposed. It's an emotional paradox. They miss the feeling of being in control, not the vulnerability of being connected. The tragedy is that the avoidant doesn't always recognize this dynamic themselves. They may genuinely believe they miss the person, and in a way, they do. But what they miss most is the sense of security that came from being desired without having to risk emotional openness. Their longing is real, but it's rooted in fear, not love. Until they learn to face that fear without reaching for control, their "I miss you" will always be an echo of the power they lost, not the connection they're ready to build. Real connection begins where control ends, because love cannot exist in an environment ruled by fear. When someone spends their energy trying to manage how much they give, how much they feel, or how much they're seen, they might feel safe, but they can never feel fulfilled. Control is a wall disguised as strength. It keeps out rejection, yes, but it also keeps out intimacy. True connection requires vulnerability, the willingness to let another person see the parts of you that aren't polished, certain, or composed. It means allowing closeness without a guarantee that it won't hurt. That's what makes it real. For the avoidant person, this idea can feel unbearable. To them, surrendering control feels like surrendering safety. They've built their emotional world on the belief that dependence equals danger, and that needing someone means weakness. But real love doesn't threaten independence. It deepens it. In a healthy relationship, you don't lose yourself by being close to someone. You find new layers of yourself through that closeness. Letting go of control isn't about giving your power away. It's about trusting that you can be seen and still be safe. It's the difference between performing love and actually experiencing it. When control governs connection, every gesture becomes transactional. Affection is measured, communication is strategic, and vulnerability is delayed until the other person has proven they're safe. But love doesn't thrive in strategy, it thrives in honesty. It's in the moments when you admit you're afraid, when you reach out even though your pride tells you not to, when you listen instead of defend. Those moments can't happen when control is in charge. Control demands certainty. Love only grows in uncertainty. That's why real connection feels risky. It asks for trust before proof, commitment before comfort, and openness before reassurance. As the avoidant learns to release control, they begin to experience a kind of peace that control never offered. It's quieter, softer, and far more stable. They start to see that vulnerability isn't something to fear, but something to master. It doesn't make them weak, it makes them human. It allows them to experience love as something mutual, not managed. When they stop trying to engineer outcomes, relationships begin to flow instead of fracture. They start to feel rather than calculate, and in that space, connection becomes effortless. Letting go of control doesn't mean chaos, it means choosing courage over caution. It means understanding that love will never be perfect or predictable, but it can be deeply rewarding if you stop trying to manipulate its shape. The irony is that the safety they've been chasing through control is found only when they stop gripping so tightly. Connection doesn't require guarantees, it requires presence. When the avoidant finally allows themselves to be seen, not as who they think they should be, but as who they really are, that's where love finally finds room to grow. When you look at the pattern of the avoidant, you start to see something quietly heartbreaking beneath it all. It's not that they never cared, and it's not that they don't want love. It's that they've been fighting a battle between their desire for connection and their fear of losing control. They push away the very thing they want most because closeness feels dangerous, even though loneliness hurts just as much. And somewhere along the way, they forget that real love doesn't ask for perfection or performance. It asks for presence. When the avoidant finally understands that control is not protection, but isolation, something begins to shift. They start to see that vulnerability isn't a weakness to be fixed, but a doorway to something deeper. Love cannot breathe where fear is in charge. It needs space, trust, and the courage to stay even when it feels uncomfortable. And that courage begins the moment they stop trying to manage love and start allowing it. If you've ever loved someone avoidant, or if you've recognized avoidant patterns in yourself, know this healing doesn't happen overnight. It happens in small acts of honesty. It's in saying, I'm scared, but I'm still here. It's in choosing to open the door 1 inch at a time until the need for control no longer outweighs the desire for connection. Because the truth is, love isn't something you control, it's something you practice. And the more you practice letting it in, the less you'll need to run from it. So, to anyone who's been caught in this cycle, whether as the avoidant or the one who tried to love them, remember that the goal isn't to win or fix or prove anything. The goal is to learn how to meet love without armor, because only then can love stay. Thank you for taking the time to listen, to reflect, and to see the deeper story beneath the behavior. Growth doesn't happen in comfort, it happens in awareness. And awareness, when met with compassion, changes everything. So take what you've learned today, not as judgment, but as an invitation to love more bravely, to connect more honestly, and to live without letting fear write your story. Thank you for being here, for showing up with an open heart, and for being part of this conversation about what it really means to love and be loved. Until next time, take care of your heart, give it patience, and remember that connection begins where control ends. Thank you and goodbye.